Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Covenant Cast. I'm Zach.
And I'm Steven.
I'm Robert.
And today, we're talking about the metagame. Robert, what have you been up to this week?
I only did one thing, and I saw that Wonder Woman movie.
Wow, you did a thing.
Hey, that's good. I like
with
to know.
like however many hundreds of hours in a
I like
week.
that this section is becoming the movie review section.
It was actually surprisingly good for a DC film. That is to
Everybody
say.
always goes there.
Well,
Did you see Batman v Superman?
just a quick, consolidation. Something about the Marvel studio owned by Disney, obviously, just wizards of entertainment. They got the vibe of their universe, and it's holistic and well consolidated, and they know their pacing, everything. Great experience watching Marvel movies, but the DC ones, Batman, Superman, and yada yada, they're just kind of like, some things are amiss here.
Well, I think we talk a lot about foundations on the show, and I actually think it is foundational.
We have a ticker actually playing every time we say
click,
it.
Click.
But I think the big thing for Marvel was they put out Iron Man, and that was kind of like because they'd done Spider-Man, and it wasn't really Marvel, but Spider-Man, the original, was pretty successful, and then they tried a Hulk movie, and didn't go so well, and then it was like Iron Man, and it was like, this is how we make our movies.
Protagonist.
And they just kind of just the way they built that.
clicked.
But DC, besides the Dark Knight trilogy, which was totally different, hasn't really had that cornerstone.
Right.
Until maybe this movie.
Anyway, it was very good. I think it was well written, well acted, well cast for Wonder Woman herself.
She's awesome.
The Amazons were nailed, just this relentless tribe of lady warriors. It's an amazing film. I highly recommend checking it out.
Wow. That accelerated.
Yeah.
I want to see it now after hearing
Good to great.
Yeah.
There's a book about that. What about you, Steven?
Not anything nearly as exciting, mainly boring and involving self-maintenance, such as getting new running shoes.
Hey.
Those, yeah.
How many miles do you get out of
Hold
a pair
on,
of running
yeah.
shoes?
Don't pause. Don't stop the podcast. I think it's more interesting than this. They're this Swiss shoe, Cloud something about clouds. And it's a minimal running shoe, but it has like this weird new padding thing. And they're awesome. They're really,
So no
really
barefoot
cool.
running?
No. That's pretty well documented to not be good at this point.
Especially on anything that's not natural.
We definitely had a period
soft
of super minimal. Barefoot running was the thing for a while, and that did rock the industry for a bit about, we got some things wrong by just stuffing feet into this big padding thing. And that's pretty unnatural. So then I think the industry took a lot of cues from that, but then it's now come full circle where barefoot running, not the greatest, old school running, not the greatest, heel toe kind of stuff. And now it's kind of right in the middle.
Flat foot running.
Where you have you have minimal shoes that still have enough padding, and so a lot of cues have been taken. And this is the result of those kinds of things.
I do miss the preponderance of barefoot runners because it's like a T-Rex ballerina on the balls of their feet, going down a trail or something.
Yeah, I did it for a
It's
bit.
very
Jonathan
funny
did
to
it for a
watch.
long time. It hurts.
It's demanding,
for a while.
and it looks hilarious.
Yeah.
Is the most important.
I mean, and the thing is, barefoot running didn't start out you didn't run on asphalt.
Right.
You know, if you're running through the woods and stuff, I guess that would make more sense because you don't need as much padding. You have a nice ground cover.
You're gonna step on a pine cone. And
Yeah.
Ow.
Well, your feet just have to be tough. And that's kind of what we get down. Like Cody Lundeen, as we know.
Cody Lundeen.
Also did some cooking.
Great.
Learned a lot of things. A lot of things that were learned are
Baker's Myth.
meats that are often on sale. Generally, and most people, well, that's not true. People who are very much into grilling probably know this very well by now. But for
Bobby
those of
Flay.
us who are kind of getting into things, or
So
trying
ready.
to be a little bit more self-aware, not self-aware.
Like the Buddha?
Take care of yourself.
Okay.
You're trying to take care of yourself more.
Self-conscious?
Do some things, not going out to restaurants and these kinds of things. I want to make good food at home, right? Things you need to know are there are a vast number of cuts of meat for any different animal, right? Have all sorts of different names, right? And generally, if something's cheap, and especially cheap and on sale, it's the kind of cut of meat that needs 12 to 24 hours of care to make good. Right? So this is important. So when we're talking about, and I looked at a diagram of a cow, for instance, where you had the near the back
The loins
up top,
and stuff. And,
very tender meat up here, and then as you get to the moving parts, the muscles and stuff is very, very
tougher.
tough.
Yeah.
And you have like briskets and stuff. And this is kind of where barbecue arises from, where 24 hours of slow cooking something makes anything great. Pig ears, etc. So I had some adventures in some lesser known meats, like some blade chop cuts of like pork.
Blade chop?
Which is more like a pork loin, but I think a little bit worse.
Is that like a slap chop?
Probably similar. But, you know, it's not like a
This is the best conversation I've ever been
a proper pork chop. You pay good money for a proper pork chop or a prime rib or something because you can take that thing, season it, throw it on a grill, and it's delicious. But then, like your cheaper meats, you can't just season it and put it on a grill. It's very tough, or it's just not pleasing texture-wise, or it doesn't have any flavor.
Sure.
And so I dealt with a lot of that. Speaking of no flavor, turkey, for instance, one ultimately
more than chicken.
Ultimately, no, chicken is far superior.
No, wait, but chicken
It's
is known
vastly
for its
superior.
ability to adapt to flavor and like to take them out. Turkey,
That's
I
true.
think, has a much more distinct and pronounced flavor of its own right.
Yeah, you're right. It does have a flavor, but
Is it like the
Particularly the
vanilla
dark
of
meat.
meats?
I don't
Try the dark
know,
meat.
man. But it's
better.
also just it's so lean that it just is unpleasant to eat.
Got to eat that
In general.
Henry VIII haunch though. Those are always
It's
dripping with.
that's true.
With fats. and
That's
stuff.
actually very true. But the problem was like you get these ground turkey, like white ground turkey breast. You know, it's like it's the driest thing. And so previously I've been doing the standard recipe, which is like you add eggs and wet ingredients and things and some breadcrumbs. Now we're balancing moisture and stuff. We make the patties. We put them on, and it's fine. It works. You can do ginger and make it kind of
Whoa, is that some kind of Eastern thing?
yeah, an Eastern flair there, those kinds of things. But what I did, I finally was like, I've been doing this. It takes me 2 hours to make 5 turkey patties because I got to get it and I got to move it around and I've got to let it sit and all this stuff. It's like I'm just gonna salt, pepper, paprika, maybe some other garlic.
Smoked or sweet?
Throw it Hungarian. Throw it on the grill and see what happens. And it was actually far better than any other turkey patty
It took
I've
you
done.
2 less hours.
Nice.
It took me 2 less hours. And just like Robert, and we had this conversation, I've looked up recipes online, and you have these people, and it's like, all right, let me tell you my secret recipe. It's a half teaspoon of 17,000 ingredients. It makes no sense. It's just immediately, you just get...
I'm getting
Cancel that.
1,000 hints from this
It
dish.
says, I see it's a 30 ingredient list for a
Unnecessary.
hamburger.
Unnecessary.
Like that's
Silly.
ridiculous. So it took me a while to find one, and I found a little recipe, and it was like, here's 6 ingredients, 5 spices, and the turkey. I used that, and it was great.
Awesome.
So,
Well,
I don't know. There you go.
Bring some of those into
Excellent.
the office.
And the rest of the stuff was fine too,
What do you
ultimately.
serve? What do you serve a turkey patty in?
chop.
Like a pita bread, I imagine.
I don't know. You can
Maybe a
just put
bagel
on a
chip?
burger and just hope nobody notices. Put it on
no
a
one
hamburger bun. Yeah. I gotta tell you this.
We replaced the regular patties with Steven's new turkey patty.
He said new patties.
yeah, you won't know. Guess the meat.
But I would take a veggie patty over a turkey patty, and I would always take a hamburger patty proper over a turkey.
patty?
Yeah,
But that's
you
just
can make
classic.
a great veggie patty. Yeah.
Oh man, I don't know. I have a hard time accepting
Way more
that.
flavor than turkey.
Zach, how about you?
Yeah, save us anyway. But this,
Speaking of the metagame.
I just, went to Chicago. Had a good time. That was fun.
You did
I
real
love-
thing.
I love
experience,
Chicago. Food experience.
Are you in or out on Chicago pizza? Let's go ahead and split the cats right now.
Man, I got in trouble for talking about Frank Thomas, so I got to stay away from the Chicago topic.
Trigger warning. Get ready for it.
Just watch out. I actually really like Chicago, and the pizza
The
is
sauce is on top.
the standard deep dish pizza is really absurd.
That is how they do it, right? The sauce is on top.
Yeah, they kind of
No,
flip
so
drop
it's like
it and reverse
crust,
it.
and then it's like pepperoni. The crust, it was pepperoni. I was at Giordano's, which is like the classic touristy pizza place. And then 12 pounds of cheese, and then the sauce goes on top.
Okay, yeah.
And it's good, but the problem
yeah.
is, so I got sick. I got sick one time after eating it because it's just literally
Too much
12
cheese.
pounds of cheese.
Yeah.
So this time we went with a bunch of people, and I split open the pizza, cut
Oh, no.
cut 80% of the cheese out,
Oh,
and then just ate it, and it was delightful.
He performed an open table.
Open pizza surgery.
his
I'm
pizza.
surprised you didn't get shot in
Yeah,
Chicago
I know.
for that.
No, well, it's the touristy version.
Somebody
so-
probably got
so everyone-
red-faced and stuff.
Everyone was fine.
Actually, that plus the Frank Thomas comment of last
I'm
time
out.
probably has you on an anti-Chicago.
I actually, for as much as I love Chicago, I better not go back because I might
Did
just.
you have a Chicago dog?
I did. Yeah.
Okay. What'd you think of that?
I like that.
It's really good. There's a place called Portillo's or Portillo's. I have a friend and he says Portillo is his last name. So.
Robert Portillo?
Robert Portillo.
Yeah.
So we just borrowed it.
And I love that place. So if you're going and you want to check it out,
I'm definitely a New York style pizza guy, by the way. I
Yeah.
know
Thin
that.
slice.
Yeah, I
huge.
just like the experience of eating it as a fold. Folding it out, that's where it's at for me. for sure. And I don't like cheese as much, so it makes sense to
Yeah,
have less
a
cheese.
lot of cheese is just crazy.
I know. So,
All right,
cheese is a very
now
divisive
that we had our
topic.
10-minute food segment, let's get to the real topic. What is a metagame? There are a lot of definitions for this, and I would be curious
Honestly, pizza is a good metagame.
All right, let's talk about pizza.
We have the
and
Chicago
metagame.
meta, you have the New York meta.
Yeah.
You've got all these different regional metas.
Man,
You've got
this
a Hawaiian
wasn't
meta.
even planned.
Yeah.
Tell me more.
Good
I want to know what
Well,
you guys think a meta is.
Okay, what a metagame is to me, and we'll bring it to gaming, I'm sure, here in just a second, but a
Back to
metagame is
pizza.
simply a psychology, a group psychology that has developed around how something should be done.
Okay.
That's, I think, at its basic
Convention.
That's what most people would agree is a meta of
Well,
anything, right?
It's certainly not like an agreed upon thing as much as it's an understood thing.
Yeah, like high quality gifts.
Can I agree with
Metaposts
that
only.
understanding? Yeah, that's fair.
Do you agree? Do you get what I'm saying? So it's not
Yeah,
like
yeah. Sometimes you have to fall into it even if you don't agree with it.
and like it's
find
just
yourself in
it's
it.
almost like conventional wisdom, where it's like a meta is like we have evaluated how to cook pizza, or
This is
what
just how it's
cards are
done.
good, right? Like the
Yeah.
meta would say that this card is good right now and this card is bad, or this miniature's good, this card's bad.
Interesting. Okay, actually, this is relevant, and I hate to bring the grill back up, but it is relevant.
Fire it up.
There is
Literally.
there's a meta for grilling,
Mm-hmm.
and you're probably aware of it, and it states the following: a hamburger or any piece of meat for that matter should only be flipped once, right?
Yeah.
So you put it on
Put down, flip, taken off.
for 3-4 minutes, depending on your heat. Flip, 3-4 minutes, off.
Yep.
Guy that's standing there flipping the burger every 30 seconds.
Please don't press.
Problem, right? So we're saying that's a problem. However, I just read about 3 days ago, I read an article
It's a revelation.
where this has been debunked. This meta belief
What?
has been debunked.
Sacre bleu.
This has real life applications.
As
Yeah, I
it
know.
turns out, so the thinking was at the time that because you're flipping it quickly, that the cool side on top is then making contact with the grill, then takes a while to heat back up to temperature before it starts really cooking the inside again. And by the time it gets to temperature, you're flipping it again. So like it's not able to heat up properly because you're always replacing it with the
cooking it through
cool
or
side,
whatever.
right? However, it's been found that if your grill is at least 350, I
Ambient
think,
temperature keeps it
ambient
stable.
temperature doesn't matter. It keeps it stable. So in fact, you are able to get a more even cooking experience by flipping at least every minute.
Can we move it up to like that higher
I don't know what we can do.
shelf ever?
But there are some people who will hear that and say, no, that's not how
That's
burgers are done.
outrageous. I'm
Yeah,
one
this
of
is
them.
ridiculous. It's not
Somebody
how
hand me a
burgers are done.
pitchfork.
But then there's some people that will say, well, but look at the proof. Look at what has changed, and we've tested this, and there's now a new understanding. And I think
a
that's
hint of
exactly
celery
what
salt.
happens in games. So we have a game releases, cards go out into the pool of players, a meta is immediately established, a lot of times regional, local, and now because of the internet, nationwide, worldwide, about how the game is best played, the cards that should be used, the miniatures that should be used, what is the best deal, those kinds of things. And then a lot of times in a big competition, somebody comes along and says, no, you can flip a burger every minute. And they end up winning the championship. Everybody goes, oh my gosh, how could we have seen this coming? And then the meta changes. And now it's like, well, this is the new way to play. Like, for instance, in Destiny, low-cost cards and Boundless Ambition, these kinds of things are now much higher valued than they were before that meta shakeup happened. So it's a conventional way of doing things, and it is always evolving and changing as new ideas kind of come to the fore and are either adapted or refused outright.
So there was a thing you mentioned a while back, and even yesterday, anytime we talk about this kind of topic, which is ultimately, I think the difference between like subjective evaluation and objective evaluation.
Hard.
Hard.
It's hard.
And so when you're looking at a game, right? Like I'm thinking, I'm most into Destiny right now. That's what I'm testing a lot. But when you're looking at a game, there's definitely the like, if you could build every possible deck and put it in some kind of simulation with absolute only optimal plays, whatever those are.
Machine learning.
And you could run it 1 billion times, and the data pops out, and it could evaluate all the different cards and tell you where all of these rank. There's a potential objective ranking of the cards and why you use them and what decks and all that kind of stuff. And then to me, the meta is basically the direct opposite, which is taking into account experiences that you've had with the game, what you expect to see, what you're predicting to see, which changes the ultimate value of each card.
It does.
So if no one is running range damage, Deflect is a pretty bad card.
Yeah.
But if 80% of people are running range damage, deflect becomes a potentially much more interesting card.
Yeah.
The same thing with like a Boundless Ambition. If most decks are running 15 upgrades, and most decks aren't going through their whole hand in a single turn, Boundless Ambition a lot of times seems like a kind of worthless card. But again, under the idea that you have a whole bunch of cheap cards in your deck, Boundless Ambition gets at least a little bit more interesting.
Absolutely. And for those following at home, Boundless Ambition is a card that you play and then it lets you draw back up to your hand size. And so in a game like Destiny, where you're normally drawing up every turn, it's like, well, I'm going to get that anyway. Why would I pay 1 for it? But it basically what is happening is you're able to play a lot of cheap cards, get a new hand in the same turn, and then you have all these cards to discard for rerolls. So now,
or if they're cheap cards, play them.
It's and it's really just pay 1 to reroll your dice 5 times if you want it to, which can be extremely powerful for like dice that are really good, like Darth Vader and those kinds of things. So we do have this idea of a metagame, and the thing that I find it fascinating on the objective versus subjective, I think if we run that simulator, and every deck plays every deck, there is probably a best deck that will beat every other deck more than they will beat it, like that kind of a thing. So let's say,
speaking, X is the best.
X is the best. But the reality is you go to a tournament, you aren't going to see one of every possible deck in the game. You're going to see whatever decks are playing to people's current psychology about how to win the game. So as you said, if it's about playing upgrades or a Netrunner, if it's about installing ice, or if it's about non-installing ice, all these different games have their, kind of templates or archetypes that might be strong or weak. Game of Thrones, classic archetypes: Rush, Control. What's the other one? Aggro is kind of a thing, although that gets really confusing between aggro and rush. It's really, to me, it's always been aggro and control are kind of the two things.
Yeah.
And so, like, if all the decks are moving really fast in X-Wing, if all of the damage is coming up front, if that would affect the list that you build. I need to build a list that can absorb an initial impact and then fight back.
Yeah.
Or I need to build a fast deck that's as fast or faster.
Sure.
Whereas if the meta is really slow and control-y, then now you have to make considerations based on those kinds of cards and those kinds of lists. So I think that's pretty much the idea of a metagame. So when you hear, and a lot of people listening might have never really appreciated or understood what a metagame ultimately is. And I think we do a pretty poor job in these kind of content creation communities, like really letting people know what we're talking about when you say, oh yeah, the meta is this or the meta is that. That's what it is. It's this basically battlefield of expectations, and it has a lot of psychology involved. And it can change on a dime, is the important thing. But it's just the accepted convention of what is best and strongest to play in any given moment.
And I mean, even if you use your example of the objective best deck, right? And if we say statistically best deck based on how it performs against the entire field. Sorry for hitting the shirt. Like how it performs against the entire field. The thing about that, though, that immediately happens is if in any game that X is the best, now the question, all of a sudden, you're not looking at all of the cards. You're looking at what can I do to beat that deck. Right? And so that's when the moment starts to exist. The moment the meta starts to exist.
That's when the game exists. That's when tournament play exists.
This
That's
is when the meta game is created,
happening.
right?
Yeah.
When it says, all right, well, Vader Raider, because the game first came out, Destiny in particular, a deck called Vader Raider was very popular early on. And then the meta was like, well, how do you adjust to this? And so that evolved the gameplay. And both people's perception of how to play as they learned and played more and got more consistent, and the pacing of the game and everything changed. And so I think there is no objective best.
It doesn't ever stop, is the thing.
Because you're not
right?
playing in a vacuum.
It's like an evolution.
It's just a big game theory kind of thing.
Sure.
Well, if you're playing that, I'll play this, and if you're playing that, then I'm going to play this. And
it's
then
feeding off and propagating itself indefinitely.
Also important to note,
As long as there's new stuff, anyway.
board games as well, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it happens no matter what the thing is, it's going to exist. What's the best way to win at Catan? What's your strategy always in Catan, right? Yeah, like always.
Every time.
There's always this kind of strategy of how do I play this game best? And as your experiences change and you see new strategies, you might say, oh, that is better than what I was doing. I'm going to start doing that next time. And so you can see how in any game this kind of thing exists.
Yeah.
And now if I know you're doing that strategy that I'm aware of, well, now my strategy might change because I can take this niche over here, I can screw you up, those kinds of things.
Hey.
Yeah, really, I mean, anytime conventional wisdom can exist, a meta develops. And it's a little different when you're talking about grilling a hamburger. I'd love to touch base back
Not
to this.
that different.
Well, the thing I think about a hamburger is you can literally do both. You can taste both hamburgers.
Side by side.
And you can say, well, this one tastes better. And there's no like...
To who?
Yeah,
Well,
still subjective.
to you, right? It is
Yeah.
subjective, but at the same time, in a game like this, you, again, going back to the deflect example, it's literally a card that removes a die showing range damage and does damage to your opponent. And if no one in the game is playing range damage, that card has no value.
Yeah, that's true.
So
There's no baseline for a card to have any value whatsoever until you give it a playing field.
absolutely.
And food kind of always has a baseline of like, I'll consume
I
it.
need to
It
eat.
will get
Yeah.
eaten. And you know, you get to make the judgment because you're eating it, and you can
Yeah.
decide which one you like the taste of better. But with deflect, it's like, no, it's literally either going to do something or not ever do anything
Yeah.
at all.
Yeah.
So, and there's a lot of cards that are like that, or ships, or miniatures, or whatever, where I think Balanced Ambition is a great example in Destiny, where it seems to have little value, but in the right context, it has a whole lot of value. And so that is really just the evolution of a metagame happening, and even just people's play style in general. So how do you see a metagame affecting a tabletop game in general? What role does it truly play at large in any game's existence?
Well, I think FFG actually does a really good job of promoting what I would consider a pretty healthy metagame. Because the way that a metagame should affect any tabletop game is give you the information that you need to make deck building decisions that are going to be successful for you. So as you learn about the given strategies in a game, the first thing is the discovery of what do we feel is the strongest. The second thing is the discovery of how to beat the thing that is the strongest. And the third thing is determining where on that never-ending scale of, teching for this, or the answer to this, or the answer to the answer to this, where do you want to put yourself whenever you go to an event or whenever you're playing to ensure your own success? And you can shoot this the wrong direction many times. Like, if you're the person bringing the thing that's best, sometimes that is the right call because people haven't really figured out how to beat it yet. Then sometimes, if you're the person teching to beat the thing that's best, you actually are in the worst position because the best thing has either adapted to counter its counter, or this thing down here can beat both of these things, and nobody's expecting
paper,
that deck.
scissors.
Yeah. So there's a lot of this movement around, and what it does is it should keep the deck building and the discovery and exploration of the game fresh, where it takes it from the cards themselves and takes the exploration and discovery into the actual social and cultural, implications of the gaming community. So like, the cards aren't changing, but the game is staying fresh because the cards you're playing are changing. And that's ultimately what a meta is supposed to be about. It's supposed to be about that like turning wheel of adaptation.
Sure.
So what do you think that a healthy meta looks like?
Oh man.
Wheels turning.
Yeah, wheels
Lots
turning
of
all
options.
the time. But I would hope that it's just endless variety, because ultimately a meta can never really detach itself from that subjective element. It can try its hardest, and on certain occasions people might happen to be objectively right, but incidentally it must be some part subjective. And if that's going on with a large enough and varied player group, you're going to get so many different people contributing their own unique ideas, tastes, etc., that should pan out in all kinds of wondrous and interesting ways that not only keep the scene fresh and interesting, but also will keep it something that the designers themselves can foil in sort of like both an event diagram kind of way. Like, how does it all line up together? It's like, what are the players doing? How does that inspire the developers? And hopefully, much like I guess Magic has achieved, if done correctly and enough common ground interest,
Yeah.
forever.
And it really revolves around there being a diverse set of tools in any given card pool or miniature pool or whatever it is.
With like reasonable balance, some of these
Yeah.
other like fundamentals that we've referenced in previous podcasts, it's like it's not just one single pillar that makes all this work. It's a fusion and a synthesis of many different things.
And that's when I say I think FFG does a pretty good job of seeding cards into a pool that may seem not that great at first, but that are there to answer potential overreaches in terms of power in the future. There are good ways to do this and bad ways. Like, I hate silver bullets.
I was getting ready to ask you about silver bullets.
Claude in Netrunner is a great example. Anything in Destiny that would be like, if this support is out, you can't play an ambush card. Those are awful.
Fundamentally, a silver bullet, right, is a card that doesn't do anything except for stop a specific thing from happening on the other side of the table.
Absolutely.
So Clot, what does Clot do as an example?
Clot, so in Netrunner, Clot was a virus that you put down, and it was a little bit more tolerable because the game had a natural way to get rid of virus cards. So the Corp could spend a turn and purge viruses and get rid of it. Of course, there were issues with that because of so much recursion in the game, but it was a card that said the Corp can't score an agenda the same turn that it plays it down.
So you can't like score out of hand.
So that was a common strategy from the beginning of the game. NBN really ran the board on it. And so yeah, so you had this game now where if I play this card, my entire strategy of my deck is just kind of turned off. Game of Thrones First Edition was awful about this.
They were all over the place.
And we complained about this for a long time, and everybody says, oh, it's fine because it's balanced. And it's like, it's not about it's not about whether it's being played or not. It's a flawed concept.
It's violating game fundamentals.
Very much so. And that was like King Robert's Host. When it's standing, you can't do a power challenge.
Yeah, Wintertime Cat, no intrigue challenges.
No intrigue challenges? It makes no sense. I mean, it makes no sense. It takes an element of the game away, and nobody has a better time. Yeah. It's just wrong.
It's like there are only 3 challenges. Why are you yoinking?
It'd be very similar if there was a character that you put out in Destiny or support that said you can't resolve range damage.
Yeah.
It's like, but my deck is designed to do range damage. Yeah. It's like, well, if you don't have an answer for this thing, then you're going to lose. Yeah. And that's really what it comes down to is.
And I would just tack on real quick that the silver bullets, I don't think, are a fair or reasonable logical retort to those kinds of things.
They always are given.
Like back in Conquest days when you had high-costed elite cards, and then they put out Backlash, and there were some people in the Conquest community who thought, okay, yeah, problem solved, and that's like, no, not really, because
you just lost 2 deck slots.
Yeah, now the onus is on the players to run that card, taking up space, and all the other permutations thereof. It's like, no, that's the cart before the horse kind of a thing.
Yeah, I think for me, it's like when you start having to put cards in your deck that don't do anything except for stop your opponent from doing something.
An unreasonable contingency.
Right.
Because even in the Clot example, it's like, I'm trying to think of a good way to tweak that card, but like in the like can't do range damage thing, it's like, yeah, that, or it can't resolve more than 1 dice.
Or like they had to pay a credit or something to then an extra credit to score at that turn or something.
But like I would much prefer, like even with the not range damaged example, it's like when your opponent resolves range damage, get this, get a shield, get a resource, get a thing.
A card like Astrolabe was or Astrolabe, depending on where you are.
What country you're from?
Really good example in Netrunner, and it was a console, so it's something that you really needed anyway. It gave you memory, so yeah, this is great. It was very cheap. It's like, all right, it's solving a problem already, but then it gave you the secondary benefit of when your opponent installs a card, you draw a card.
Right.
And so that's a way to have an answer, a tool that you can use if the metagame is saying remote, then rather than having a card that says your opponent can't establish remote servers, you have a card that says when they do, you get to draw a card. So you advance your own deck's win condition and power by them doing the thing that you called them on doing. And I think that's really where cards that answer those kinds of things need to go.
Well, and I think that's basically, instead of restricting or stopping someone from doing something, you're penalizing them, right?
You're just tweaking
it. Always is where it needs to be.
And penalizing them in a way that's like, I'm ceding board positioning to you to do the thing I'm wanting to do, which is a way better way of doing that. Even in thinking about Destiny at this point, it's like the reason certain cards are good or not right now aren't because they're a direct answer, but it's like a stylistic thing where it's like, like Palpatine we saw in the top 4 of Destiny Weekend, and he's basically, anytime he resolves his dice, he does damage. Your opponent has to resolve damage where they want on their characters. And so a deck that can like pretty consistently generate a couple shields a turn can just soak that and almost just cancel his ability. But is not stopping him from resolving dice.
Yeah.
Is not, and they're actually doing their own thing, which is gaining shields, and like their deck can be playing off of this idea of gaining shields. And so that is kind of silver bullet versus meta adapting to a situation.
And so as long as there are cards in a card pool or a miniatures pool or even board games, if you have strategies and things on the table that allow you to adapt to changing circumstances without just telling them no, you can't do that. That's really positive, and I think we see that in a lot of FFG games. In the core sets even, you'll see cards that are like, man, so nobody's playing these cards right now. This is not very great. But then later on down the road, it's like, oh, well, if Shields ever did get too out of hand, Intimidate's a great ant. Like those kinds of things start to happen. But more specifically, maybe it's easier to talk about an unhealthy meta. Healthy meta is kind of a nice given in a game, but we only really notice when they go bad.
They get the most attention.
That's at least when there's the most vocal part of it.
And you start to feel it, right? Yeah. It's like something's wrong. What's gone wrong, and why do I feel this way about the game right now?
Sure, and I think
explain these feelings.
There's a lot of really good examples. The one I want to cite, of course, is related to Destiny.
I want to talk about X-Wing. I want to talk about the Jumpmaster. We can talk about Netrunner and the fact that DLR and Sync is still, Wizard Sync is still the thing that's being played at Euro Championships. I mean, actually there are a lot, and I think it goes back to the LCG sustainability discussion. You add more and more cards. Eventually this unhealthy meta just strangles and that's why Luke is talking about being very proactive with Destiny, his newest design, because he sees now, after having dealt with Netrunner, that an unhealthy meta does not just go away, because unhealthy means there's nothing you can do about it.
Correct. Yeah.
And I think that's the main point, is that it gets it's too good, and I can't adapt.
Just like a designer essentially injected that into the meta, they need to now do something to correct it.
Yeah, inject it right out.
Yeah. I think the best example of an unhealthy meta that I have from every game I've ever played is X-Wing, which is the Jumpmaster came out, and I just remember looking at it and thinking, this is too good. Like this is just too good for what you're getting.
Sometimes cards are too good, or things are too good by the numbers.
Yeah, and so you look at it, and they literally have introduced 3 FAQs, which is when they kind of tweak the rules, tweak the whatever's going on, the interactions.
Try to change the meta.
Try to change the meta, right? It's a nice little way to kind of shift it one direction or another, and it still wins. And that is how good it is.
3 times it's been changed.
3 times it's been changed to be less good, and then the meta just adjusts to figure it out again. And I think that's actually one case where there's two versions of a bad meta. One is, or unhealthy meta, which is in this case when there's just really not a better option. You can try these other things, and if you try to be too specifically good against this one thing and you start losing to everything else in the meta, then that's not feasible either, right? It has to be a way, I need to be able to play in such a way with my thing that gives me efficiency against this style of list, but doesn't lose.
It doesn't auto-lose against other
But in
decks.
X-Wing with the Jumpmasters, it's very difficult. It's just a hardship to do anything about. On the flip side, I think another version of an unhealthy meta is the actual meta itself, which is they have this in their head that this thing is the best. They haven't really attempted to see if they can counter it, see if we can play it out of the meta. And that can also get in a really bad spot. And I actually think that's kind of where Destiny's at right now.
So you have 2 things. You have kind of the metagame of playing the actual game. What is the best strategies within this game? Is it playing all your upgrades? Is it running central servers in Netrunner? Is it running remotes? Is it not running at all? Is it playing dogfighting style X-Wing? Is it playing turrets? So there's actually what is best to play this game? Or I never use upgrades on my ships, or I always upgrade my ships. There's that, and there's also the environment that you're playing in has its own meta as far as what you expect to see from the list. So certainly the understanding, the conception of how best to play the game then informs the lists and cards that you're going to see, right? Because I remember way back in the day we were playing Star Wars TCG, and we just had, and we should really talk about this idea of local metas and how awesome that used to be. But we would just play with the same 8 people and not talk to anybody else. And so we had developed our own standards for what we thought was good and high value in the game. Then we go to Tulsa and play, and people had completely different conceptions
100%.
Of what was the most valuable thing to do with this, that, or the other. Do you control land? Do you control air? What do you do? And that was awesome, because then you clash not only decks, but the entire idea of how to play this game best. And very similar to looking at Russian chess styles versus other chess styles and how they developed differently. And then eventually, as we started getting this kind of global community, everything has kind of flattened out.
Well, and let's talk about that. So you have, in my mind, you have a local meta, you have a regional level meta, and you have a national/world level meta. And I do think the internet has played a significant role in
So significant.
Because we played games before the internet really took over. Even then there was this hey old kids. Even then though there was definitely forums and internet like activity.
Magazines.
And magazines.
A lot of
I used to
arguments.
get those magazines.
Yeah.
Anyways, they have the Pokemon magazines, not only for the trade values of cards and stuff, but
Yeah,
it was just
articles, write-ups. What about this deck?
Then that transition online, but there is this like instantaneous like online meta. I know all the time it's like, what's the deck list? Can I see a video of it? Can I watch it? I want to build, and like it actually is really helpful if like you've never seen this list or this deck, and you can just build it, play it, and get a feel for kind of what's going on. But it also has some drawbacks.
It does. It really does.
It homogenizes everything. It creates, this great. Eventually, one idea is going to be disproportionately more agreed upon than another, and so it becomes the now standard bearer of expectation and convention. So it's like, oh, Vader Raider is a thing, almost because Vader Raider is a thing, because it got put out there and adopted by enough people, and it just snowballs. And so now this is the meta/convention that you get to contend with.
And I think the greatest risk of these kind of metas is when you have something that is both the meta thing that is like the agreed upon, like this is really good, that is also relatively easy to use, this is exactly what happened in X-Wing, and I think this is exactly what's happening in Destiny right now, which is the Jump Masters came out, and it's like you could literally run 3 Jump Masters, you could have played 5 games, and it would be tough for me to beat you, and I've played for 5 years, like just, and that wasn't the case before that. I always felt like if I was more experienced, I did have the edge regardless of like the matchup and that kind of stuff. And even with Destiny right now, you have some like Pomaz out of the second set, which is a super popular deck. It is very good, but I think the hallmark of it is that it's not only good, but it is fundamentally easy to play.
Yeah.
Like the decision making is not very complex. The consistency is pretty high, but
it rarely just goes completely wrong too. It rarely just goes sideways. It
it
always can
rarely
find
goes
a
sideways.
way back in. You
And
just keep doing it.
It reminds me a little more of in X-Wing. There's a ghost list, which is just highly consistent. It rarely goes sideways. It'll get you to the cut a lot. I've done that, and then you'll lose because like it's always a 7 or 8 out of 10. And that's really good if the lowest you're going to do is a 7, but the highest you can do is an 8. So in the games when you're playing against a bad matchup or a really good opponent and you need a 9, it just doesn't even exist.
Yeah.
And that's what Pomaz actually reminds me of, which is why I think the status of that meta is more dependent on kind of its internet concept, which is it became popular. The internet has deemed this the best thing.
Yep.
But is the internet, you can't say the internet is wrong, right? I mean, you have the most people working on a problem ever in the history of tabletop games and deciding that X is it. So surely that would have been the conclusion if all of these local metas could play for a while. They would have stumbled upon Pomaz being the contender.
I mean, the thing about that though, right? And this is kind of the next question, which is a lot of times these meta decks aren't the ones that win.
Yeah.
That's true.
And so I think that's where you start looking at, when I'm looking at big tournament results, there are cases, right, which is like the Jump Master and X-Wing, which I think is a great example. I actually objectively think it is just flat out better. Like it is just a better ship. There's not
nowhere to go from
nowhere
there.
to go from there. Whereas like a lot of times you'll see, everyone thinks that this deck is so good or this deck is so good, and then people show up with weird versions of it or different things altogether. Like being honest, going into the Destiny Worlds, I expected 0 Captain Phasma, just none, and it was
it was all big
over.
in Minnesota.
And, like no one was talking about it online, but like there is this. I think my problem with the internet meta is you're right in that there's a whole bunch of people that can test a concept, and so you should be able to draw much greater conclusions. But I think it has a proclivity to find the easy first thing, and it kind of gains a mass and it gets its own momentum, and then it's like that's just the thing. And people just take that as like the thing, and like it may be the thing, but it just feels like a lot of people are just saying that's what the meta is and going with it.
And one of the things that I object to it with meta in general, but specifically I suppose what you might refer to as net decking, is that most people are going to put themselves on the internet, they see what's got the most attention and is most common, and they run with it. They say, oh, it's X. So they bring X to their local venue or a tournament even, and they play it out. And the thing that really just troubles me is that though they might tweak it, they're still running with a fundamental design concept and play that somebody else came up with. The virtue of having your local meta back when you were kids, and the same thing that I had when I was playing Magic, and the same thing that we were doing initially, like when we got into Game of Thrones 1.0, etc., is individuals diving in, doing their research, testing, and trying to find any shtick they can lay their hands on, and just have a few games with it, and you'll know probably pretty quickly if this is hot or not, dud or stud, and you just try to see if it works or not, and then it's like, okay, like the famous anecdote we had where it's
Balerion?
like, Balerion, it's like, Zach comes over to the old house, and it's like, Steven says, Zach, you gotta play Robert's new Power Behind the Throne Intrigue Lannister deck, and Zach's like, okay, and then what
Not knowing.
Yeah, not knowing was that Zach also had a new deck that we had no idea about. It's this Targaryen Balerion deck, and it's just like, kneel everything. and
just keep
and yeah,
dropping
just
them
shuts
down.
it down, and I got pretty close, but there's nothing you can do about dragons. So I can't wait for that next season of Game of Thrones, because
Fire.
let's see how that pans out. But anywho, that's kind of the crux of the matter, is that, like you're saying, with this critical mass that can be developed online, it can get away with itself, and people will go with what's available, what's easy, even just conceptually or creatively, and effectively deny themselves what I think is one of the most enjoyable and beautiful parts of a game experience, which is that self-discovery, putting yourself in a position to learn your own fundamentals, to experiment and see what can be done, and just take it away.
Well, and I think the other part of that is you take something like Pomaz or even Vader Raider in the early days of Destiny, and what the internet is really good about is when you find a thing, now everyone does it, and they can really do a lot of test games and optimization on that
You
thing.
can optimize that first
That
discovery
concept.
point. Yeah.
But the specific example of Vader Raider is so funny because it was one of the first decks. It was before the game even came out. Vader got spoiled. The Raider had been spoiled. People were playing on Tabletop Simulator, and it was like, this is the deck. It's so crazy. Nothing can compete. It's like, the game's not even out yet. But the way that was built and the way people were valuing upgrades and control and resources and
Zero
cards
cost events. That kind of thing.
was in such a way that this is how you build it. This is how you play it. It's been played thousands of times online. There's 3 or 4 cards you may switch in or out depending on what you think.
We're complete.
And that's the deck.
Yeah.
And then advance 6 months down the road at Worlds, and you have a Vader Raider deck that's got 15 cards in it that no one's ever put in a Vader Raider deck. And so I do think the global meta and the internet is fantastic for certain things.
I think it's good at finding the gateways.
There's some yins and some yans
which I
to
think
this.
is really great, especially for new players, honestly.
What it really is, what it seems to me to be is it's more like that machine example that you gave in the beginning, right? This is just a large group of people running equations over and over, and they find the first few things that really just come out categorically on top. It's like, all right, great.
Fundamentals.
But that is ultimately, given our discussion, really where the meta begins. And I think the biggest risk and the point to be made here as players listening to this podcast is that you have to understand that that is where the meta begins, not where it ends. So when you hear all this stuff about POMAS, or when you hear all this stuff about jump masters, which maybe, and sometimes it's a kind of a different example.
Inescapable, yeah.
Inescapable.
Sometimes it is the best.
When you first get that hit of here's what's being played, that's when the discovery begins. So now you build that, you test that, you try that out, you play you play your current deck against that, you tweak your deck, can it beat it? Can it also beat this over here? And that's where, if you're not doing that, if you're not taking that next step, you are just going to bring some kind of deck to a tournament or some kind of list to a tournament, and you're never going to get very far with it. Because you've only taken the concept and kind of that group think, you put it on the table, and there's nothing to differentiate you or that list from any number of other people who could have done the exact same thing. But when you take that and then you ingest it, and then you play against it, and you spend a couple of months in that space, and you bring the thing that nobody was expecting, even if it's a version of the original thing, you change it, you swap it, you tweak it, that's when you find these decks that make it to the final table. It actually does take your own agency. Like, you can't just import that.
No cookie cutters, please.
And as you're saying too, that is the most fun that I ever have during a game.
Goodness, yes.
Very like the Agate 1.0, when we were tracking down packs, we were trying to find them all across. And that honestly was the most fun I ever had playing Game of Thrones.
It was wonderful.
And it was like every week there was a tweaked deck or a new deck. Robert was sitting there sorting through his cards. Ooh, this would work good with here.
Constant.
I was over here. It's like, ooh, maybe if they're in this Euron, now I have a Raider deck and I'm going to explore the Raiders for a while. That's where the most fun is. So I actually have a question with that. If you want to have the most fun with a game, should you just stay away?
Well,
stay away from the internet completely?
I think this is kind of where I was going, because I don't think it just applies to people who win a big event, or a local event, or whatever. Which is, I think a lot of time, even the more people just looking to have fun, and a lot of times termed casual people, will take that at face value, and we'll just run that deck, and that's fine. If you don't want to be good at building decks, you don't want to understand all the concepts, you just want to do a thing, play the deck as you see it. But at the same time, don't be afraid to try everything. Like, there's a lot of fun in trying these random cards that people don't think are good, and you'd be surprised when you start putting in cards. Most cards, designers aren't, well, at least in games I play, most cards aren't designed to just be unplayable.
Yeah.
It's like they do something. Like even Take Cover in Destiny, it's just 0 cost gain a shield. It's like that doesn't seem too crazy at first, and then it's like, well, you know what? A free shield is pretty okay sometimes.
Pretty good. Free damage.
But I think the most important thing to gather from that is, I don't think you just throw online out, but I do think it's critical to understand why people are saying the things they're saying and why they believe that the cards are good or not good, or decks are good or not good, and not just what they're saying.
In moderation,
so
huh?
just because
Yeah.
I'm, in a deck list I post, I might be like, Take Cover doesn't really fit, it's not good. It's like, you may take that as Take Cover's not good, but that does not mean Take Cover is never good.
Yeah.
And so understanding why in this context Take Cover might not be the right call is way more important to the game than what is actually being said.
And I actually would, I think I'll counter that a little bit and say that I think that I think that it would be more fun. I think it would be beneficial if I had a group like us, for instance, like the three of us. Let's say we get into L5R.
I'm busy.
And
A lot of people do this.
let's say we get into L5R and say, no outside external reading, deck list, nothing.
Like
Just
the old
us.
days. Yeah.
Every week
Maybe
we'll
we'll do that.
gather on a Friday or Saturday and we will just play the new decks and we'll just explore that.
Yeah.
I honestly think that would be way more fun.
It would be refreshing.
I think it would be way more fun.
I think, that's largely how
It's not good for our content.
Sounds
But-
pretty, sounds pretty hipster to me, though.
But honestly, that's
so don't do that.
that's largely how I attempt to play myself, which is like, I don't like looking at deck lists. I don't like,
You don't like spoilers, I know. for sure.
spoilers. I don't like I'll listen to this, some things but I'm taking it as like a 5%, like, because to be good at a game, especially on a high level, I think you have to be aware of what the internet's saying and what the meta's saying.
It's like the other player in your group.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
but like, it's not gospel.
It's like, man, this player over here is saying all sorts of stuff,
Yeah.
and he's usually right. It's like, you got to be aware of that, but you're still trying to beat the guy.
Absolutely.
And I want to kind of find a happy medium between these two that I've kind of considered, which is rather than no online or consume yourself in online 24/7 on Facebook groups and forums and all that kind of stuff in our videos.
watching those.
Do this. Here's a very simple example. So when I was in school, of course, I was studying philosophy. If you can't tell, I'm as long-winded as I'll get out. But you take something like Kant, for instance, categorical imperative, like a very common idea. I can look at that. I can read Critique of Pure Reason and be like, okay, I understand what Kant's talking about. But that's not at all true, because as I got into that line of study, I actually did an exercise where I personally had to develop a proof for this theory. So I had to start at step 1 and prove like the very basics of what is value?
Sure.
Why is it valuable? All the way down. And after I had done that, I understood. I was just amazed at how much more I understood the theory. So there's one thing to read and understand a deck and why people are doing what they're doing. It's another thing to start from scratch and prove it to yourself.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times during that process, like when I was doing that, I found a lot of potential exploitative moments in this line of thinking where it's like, well, if we attack it with this, then now we have a new line of thinking. So you can do that in a meta too.
But I think that heuristic experience is an imperative for really achieving, within any kind of meta scene, real mastery, because you have full and self-ingrained comprehension of all of the elements that are in play, assuming your awareness is wide or powerful enough. But it gives you the opportunity not to just kind of glean from others who are doing a similar thing and try to interpret it, but for yourself what's going on.
It's a different thing.
Yeah, entirely.
Yeah, and
different.
I mean, even especially in tabletop games, when I'm thinking about card games, and you draw a hand of cards, and knowing the why behind all of it is really important for making the right decisions.
It is.
Because you can take a list that you see online or a card that you see online, put it in your deck, and not know what you're doing.
Yeah.
And it's not going to do the same thing.
You can't bake cookies or make turkey patties in the same way you're going to make a burger patty.
I tried a new method.
Now, I will say, you can run 3 jump masters with absolute accuracy. I guarantee you.
Just keep
360
rolling
arcs
the
and
dice.
missiles for the win.
Well, there's a metagame.
Well, there is
kind
the
of.
metagame. We're gonna move on to some questions here. Question time. Gonna kick it off with some answers from previous shows.
Nothing better than kicking off questions with answers.
Questions with answers. So, answers to questions. You know
That's
what I
right.
mean.
So it is technically question time.
It is. The question here was, if you were in charge, what would you change about the LCG format? Kevin says, one thing missing from LCGs now that they've announced rotation is a way for old cards to enter back into the card pool. Magic Gathering reprints of new versions of old cards so things can cycle back in and your collection isn't worthless in standard competitive. Basically, I might come back to Netrunner if they reprint Ronin after rotation.
That's fair.
But, they haven't said they're not going to do this.
That's true.
Correct.
Very much
Which is
true.
it's possible.
We haven't, 5 years later, we haven't gotten to rotation yet.
Is my watch stopped?
Hold on, let me check the
What
year.
is this? Is this 2020 yet?
So we'll see how they approach that. I'm curious how they do that in Destiny as well. But
Good question. You want me to take one?
Yeah,
I'll take one.
I'll give you some.
Our LCG Sustainable, our last topic, Bass Boy John, or Bass Boy, he's a fisherman, from YouTube. Great discussion. I get why this episode mainly focused on the negative aspects of LCG as well. But I think a major benefit of them that you didn't acknowledge is that every player gets to own the entire card pool or meta. That's what we're talking about here. Or at least the tools to participate in the meta fully. You talked about a monthly pack only adding 2 to 3 cards for your faction, but the reality is that everyone has every faction. One thing I hated about CCGs is not being able to experience the full meta because you didn't have every card. And that's actually really true. You can't play the meta game if you don't have access to all the tools. Right?
Yeah.
That makes sense. That's one of the big benefits of LCGs. You can play anything and everything. That in itself is another challenge of an LCG, though. If a certain deck is too powerful or degenerate, everyone has access to it. And that's 100% true, but is that really worse than the person who has all of the collectible cards because they dropped the thousands of dollars having the
different sides of the scale.
And
Blue Ice White Dragon or whatever Yu-Gi-Oh!
I think it was
talks
Blue
about.
Eyes White Dragon.
Blue Eyes White Dragon.
But I think that is true on the double-edged sword.
Ben knows.
Of that Ben's over there nodding his head.
It's this, guys.
But
Let them know I like you.
He, by the way, did not ever have to experience gaming without the internet.
he's a millennial.
He was born to it.
So
This is a real
one
thing.
thing
we
I
have
do
deal
want to
with
add
now.
there, which is what I think is an important part of that discussion, as we mentioned last
Meanwhile,
week.
Jonathan's looking at pastures on
Yeah,
his
he
It's 2 generations.
doesn't have windows, so
Yeah,
he's just looking at
Jonathan and
country
Dan are here
sky.
working.
Countryside on
John's
the
got a
screen.
To note,
countryside up.
John had 2 monitors. One of them is on literally a pasture, a
Yes.
live stream of
The other
a
one is
pasture.
Shazam Gradient.
Because he
Beautiful.
wants to recreate a
Beautiful
window.
Yes.
Wow.
But the thing I want to add
Escape
to
to the
this
country
particular
already.
question is the fact that with a CCG, typically you're getting more cards. So when we're talking about a healthy meta, as we mentioned earlier, having more options out
More tools.
for people to adjust with is what makes that really the big difference here. Because yeah, you do get the whole meta and you get all of the cards and you can adjust, but you just get it way slower.
That's the hard thing, LCG. If something's a big thing, it's like, well, the tool's coming out in 5 packs.
Yeah.
It's like, whoa, that's 6 months from
That
now.
is
Sounds like a silver
so
bullet if I've
long
heard
for
of
now.
it.
Yeah,
And
right?
it's not even a silver bullet coming, but it's like the other styles of play aren't going to get more stuff.
Read
for
Hoth
6
Cycle
packs.
of Star Wars LCG, right?
We don't go there. All right, on to the actual questions. Hashtag Ask Covenant if you want us to answer your questions on the show. Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, hashtag Ask Covenant. We'd love to answer it. Question 1 from David. He says, do you
David
think,
from OKC, right?
do you think, is he from OKC?
Yeah, it's David.
That's a familiar name.
It's David.
Yeah.
Do you think, really?
I'm almost certain.
All right, do you
Yeah.
think FFG would rather have,
We'll look it up and then cut this section or not cut it, depending on
I don't think that's going to happen at all. Do you think FFG would rather have one player playing 3 of their LCG games or diving deeply into one of them?
Good question. Considering the new releases that are happening fairly often, the similarities a lot of times in playstyle. I think of Off of War, Thrones, Conquest, similar kind of like heavier games. You have Destiny, Netrunner, Destiny not LCG, I guess. You have Lord of the
Flies.
Lord of the Five Rings.
Lord of the Five Rings. Tell me, Lord of the Rings
Lord of
and
the Rings.
Arkham.
Yep.
Similar. Sometimes some would say Arkham is kind of a new expression of the Lord of the Rings style game. So dive into one or spread across three.
I mean, I think it's one of the benefits of the LCG format, which is if you are the kind of player that really wants to dive into a game.
But what does FFG want?
Well, we're going to get there. But I think the reality is there are some players that only have time and money to play one LCG.
Sure.
And if they do, they have a nice slow drip of cards. It's easy to keep up, and the game will get deeper as it goes along. But if that's too slow for you, LCGs are actually cost effective enough to play 2 or 3 of them. So
Unless.
I would presume that FFG wants to
Play them all.
Well,
Yeah.
they would prefer 3.
them all.
3. But at the same time, it's built so that you can play 1, 2, 3, 10. It doesn't matter, and that's cool because back in the just CCG days of card games, you really had to either commit to playing or not playing at all.
Here's what happens though, and I've seen this happen: is you have a player who's playing 3 of them. One of the metas gets a little unhealthy, and they're like, I'm going to pause that one for a second and switch over to mainly focusing on Netrunner, let's say. The likelihood of them getting back to that game once it has turned a little bit sideways is actually seemingly very low.
Yeah, because you must stay current in any of these.
Yeah, because now I got a back catalog.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, oh, well, I can't drop $80 just to start playing in the weekly tournaments again. And so it's a tough thing for them to manage.
Yeah.
And so in that way, maybe they just want you to play one and just not stop playing it.
Yep.
We will see. Question
Last
2.
game next time.
I can't even say that
Mr.
name.
Sakuragi.
Sakuragi.
I mean,
Question.
he wrote it. I'll say it.
I was just trying to pronounce it in my head.
Or
and it wasn't.
Sukaragi.
We'll go Sukaragi. How do you feel about digital and tabletop like XCOM, where an app is actually part of the core mechanic of the game?
Interesting
This is
take.
feelings, not thoughts. Remember this.
Giving example, digital scenarios for Arkham could be a cool thing. Man, I don't know. I'm not ready to fully vet my visceral emotional response to a game like XCOM, because somewhere along the way, I do think that it is crossing a line. And I think that's me being potentially
Curmudgeon.
old and curmudgeonly. Like I said, I don't have the logic behind it, and it may well not hold up at all, because I'm sure like anything I would say here can be kind of countered pretty effectively. But there's something about it that there's just too much focus on the XCOM screen and too little focus on the players and the people. And I've only played it a couple of times. So, you know, I think once you get a little bit more experience with the game, you probably are spending less time with the screen and more time with the players. But I don't know, there's something just kind of old-timey and appreciable about moving cards around manually and touching things and setting a game up, even though it can be very tedious.
And we had a whole episode dedicated to should tabletop go digital, and we talked about
There's a line.
the benefits of all this.
Christian talks about the curve, right?
There's a curve where at some point it's a gimmick, and but for me, it's like I'm not wholesale against the idea. I just haven't had a game yet that it felt completely right.
We need to dive into mansions.
Yeah.
We really do.
Because that's a very
I think it's the
involved
one.
and substantive app that really catalyzes it, but it's so much so that, at least when we were getting that demo at Gen Con last year or whatnot, it felt like it was so inherently superior. What's this board for?
Yeah.
Kind of a thing. Why
That's
isn't
where
it
I
just-
was.
Now, I mean, I could. There is a certain element of like I'm thinking about Imperial Assault, where
Are they have talked about
This
an
is a-
app
this is a
forever,
hot topic,
right?
actually.
And they have consistently.
I think they first mentioned it last year at Gen Con,
Yeah.
and now people are just like,
They have like an app development thing
Yeah.
now, like
Yeah.
team in-house.
I think in that case, you could have the entire like campaign book and the setup, and where it's basically like this tool for allowing you to do the table. It's not like, to me, it would be more as a tool and less as an integration, where it's like I don't necessarily want the screen to be involved in the actual playing, but like in all
Tell
of the
me how to
setup,
set it up.
and all of the tracking of the experience points and all of the
And like rules questions. It's like, let's look that
Well,
up real quick
and
on
the
the
construction
machine.
of the story, and like even you could imagine you play through a campaign, it's like the next one, it's like avoid missions that we've already done,
Yeah.
and it's like, well, that's pretty nice because now you can explore these other parts, and there's a lot of cool stuff that I think you can do with technology. But as it sits right now, I haven't currently played a game where I felt at home with the technology in the game.
I think we're too old.
That might be. The
I
case.
think we have finally we're no longer the young people in the space.
Yeah. I never had a digipet either.
I'm glad we have this moment on cameras. We're looking at each other.
I'm 30. Yeah, this is real now.
Sorry about you.
Whoops.
All right, well, that is it. And remember, use the hashtag right here, AskCovenant, to get your questions answered right
and
here
it's
on the
important
show.
to know, actually do that, because we literally do a search across all the mediums for that hashtag.
No,
so a lot
literally.
of times people will ask questions,
Yeah.
and some of us might see them, but they don't ever make it to the final pass because they haven't used the hashtag. So the hashtag is very important.
AskCovenant.
Use
Use
it.
it.
important.
Use it.
Thank you all for watching. We would love for you to answer wherever you're seeing this in the comments. What's your favorite game, and how do you think the meta is affecting it? Until next time, keep playing.